My best day yet. That's a I have a lot of good days now.
Hello and welcome to Center for Victory's podcast of Your Best Day Yet. At Center for Victory, we're here to help unlock, reinforce, and enrich relationships through personal and professional development. I am Eric Guy, Chief Victory Officer at the Center for Victory. With us today is a very interesting individual. I'm looking forward to digging in to this. Sam Shepard, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Eric, for having me.
Yeah, and let me just run through a few of these things because I could take like literally the whole podcast and tell people everything that you did, but I'm interested in those things you did. They're very inspiring. So Sam is a physicist, inventor, engineer. The fields that he's been in: biochemical, medical engineering, physics, chemistry, mathematics. He's the inventor of 42. Is that correct, Sam? 42 patents?
Plus or minus a couple.
Okay, that's wonderful. He's developed leading edge technologies in the environmental fields of wastewater, water, alternative energy, carbon capture systems, petrochemical, polymer and biochemical. I mean, he's holding all kind of degrees too. But what's really fascinating, I think, about Sam, and I'm going to ask him to talk a little bit more about this later, was in 2003, Sam was diagnosed with a rare type of bone marrow cancer, which could not be treated with conventional treatments. And through his journey, he actually developed something called Vasta. And I'm going to ask him to talk about that a little bit later. But Sam, let's get into it. And I know I missed a few things because I think you're the other thing that I failed to mention was that you're a dinosaur hunter too, but we'll talk about that as well. Was there anything important that I missed?
Well, I'm just old. You can't get through this life as long as I have and not accomplish something, I guess. I've written papers on. I'm also a forensic investigator, so I worked for and developed risk models for terroristic attacks. I have a lifetime fellowship status as a diplomat of the American Board of Forensic Examiners. I developed a predictive model on terroristic attacks. My training was in weapons of mass destruction and what's called COBRA, chemical ordnance, biological and radiological arms. But that goes back to September 11th in 2001, and that went on until May of 2004. And I was able to develop the risk model to predict where a terrorist was going to hit next.
Wow.
And that was a pretty interesting part. But God's gifted me with a lot between understanding a single-celled organism all the way up to what's at the center of a black hole. And I've written papers all the way through on those subjects. And it creates a lot of controversy when you don't go with the exact way that they intended to go. But in 2003, I was diagnosed with a rare cancer called polycythemia vera. And it wasn't supposed to happen to me, but it did. And the only way they could keep me alive was to bleed me. I had to be bled every month. I did that for 4 years. And that I got a little frustrated with that. And they, waking up in total darkness at 4 o'clock in the morning, realizing that all this is going to end. There is an end to this life here on earth. And the reality of it at that time hit me pretty hard. And there had to be an answer. I'd been trained and gifted in how to do research, how to find these solutions to these very, very difficult problems and questions. And so that sort of launched my journey.
And so folks, that was 2003. We're in 2024 now. So 21 years later, So the things that led to that, Sam, obviously you weren't, you've been gifted, you kind of push through with that. And, I believe it's still controversial kind of what you're doing, even with that treatment, but you have, like you said, you probably have 20 or 30 calls every day from people that are looking to not be sick anymore, correct?
Correct. When this started out, I was very, very skeptical. As a scientist, you have to be skeptical, and that's what really why I didn't really fall into the holistic lifestyle. I if I couldn't explain it from a chemical point of view or from a physical or biophysical or biochemical point of view, and I couldn't come wrap my arms around it, it was very difficult for me to understand. I grew up with people that say, "Oh my golly, I'm taking this herb. I don't know how it works." Well, I immediately leave the scene when that comes out, but it works. Well, you've lost me at I don't know how it works. So I spent 8 years trying to figure out. I was given a prognosis. There was no treatment. Um, when I went in the condition I was in, the doctor, I asked him how much time I had, and he said anywhere from 10 minutes to 10 years. He said 97% of the people will perish within 10 years. And he said, and I said, well, what about the 10 minutes? He said, your blood is so thick right now, you could throw a blood clot to your brain, your heart, or your lung right now, and it would take me 10 minutes to declare you dead. And that was an eye opener. From there, I went to the hospital. I was phlebotomized. I was phlebotomized every month, did that for 4 years just to stay alive.
Wow.
And it got old,
Yeah.
needless to say. So one very, very dark morning, have over a cup of coffee, about 4 o'clock, I was coming to terms with, is this the way I want to live the rest of my life? I'd accomplished a lot. Maybe it was time just to go. And that was a sort of a struggling moment. And it sort of just came to me. There's got to be some animals or leaves or something that doesn't get cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And God had given me all these tools in my toolbox. Surely, if anybody could figure it out, I could figure this out. And it just sort of came over me like an epiphany at that point. So I had nothing to lose. So I spent the next 4 months researching a lot of the government databases, which I still had access to. ProQuest was one. It wasn't for the public. A lot of the NIH databases are not available to the public, but I had access to those. And I found these 5 animals that apparently don't get cancer: salmon, pink flamingos, sharks, elephants, and naked mole rats. And Scripps Oceanographic in San Diego had done work, and I had asked them if they could do a mass spec or if they had any data on the molecular makeup of those species. And I wanted an entire breakdown with some screening involved, not to include the basic amino acids, something that these species did not produce, but it was found in all 5 of those species. That was the hypothesis that I put forward to them. And they came back and they said, we found one. And I was really baffled that they only found one, but they found one, and it was astaxanthin. And I asked them about astaxanthin. It come from an algae called Hematococcus pluvialis. And I was living in Houston, Texas at the time, and I went and bought one of those Intex blow-up pools. You see, I call them hillbilly hot tubs, that from Walmart, put it in my backyard against my wife's desires, by the way. And I began growing this green, slimy algae in my backyard. I got very good at growing it. And I knew how to make the algae think that it was dying. I knew how to stress the algae.
Wow.
To make it produce this antioxidant. So it would go from green to red in about 48 hours after I made it think that its pond was drying out. And there's a little trick as to how you do that. But it thought its pond was drying out, and as a defense mechanism, it would produce this astaxanthin as a tan block, as a UV blocker. So if its pond completely dried out, it would lay in the dirt, but the astaxanthin would go to the cell membrane and block the sun. So even though it was in a dry, arid environment for 100 years, the next time it rained, the algae would be alive and come back and flourish again. That was the mechanism of this algae. And that was pretty remarkable. So when I figured out how to stress it, then it would turn deeply red. And I would float the algae to the surface, skim it off, put it in a dehydrator, and I would eat that algae. And I knew it was 3.8% astaxanthin. I started out with a daily dose of about 4 to 5 milligrams a day. And my phlebotomies went from, after about 4 months, went from about once a month to once every 2 months. Statistically, it wasn't significant, but I wanted to make sure that I'm eating a red algae. Is it killing my liver or my kidneys, or is it doing any other damage? So my blood work came back normal. My A1C dropped. I was low 6s on my A1C, and I got it down into the 5s just by taking that small dose. So then I thought, okay, I'm normal. No, I don't have any terminal disease coming from eating this red algae. So I bumped it from 4 milligrams to 12 milligrams a day. And my phlebotomies got pushed out to once every 4 months. My hemoglobin wasn't climbing out as fast. And that was significant. Now I had 2 slopes of the curve. Let's see if I can do this. So I had this slope at 4 milligrams. I had this slope at 12 milligrams. So now I could calculate off the slopes of those curves, how much do I have to take so that I'm never phlebotomized for the next 50 years of my life? And I was 53 at the time. I don't think it makes a difference when you're 103. So I just chose that. And I could mathematically calculate then I needed 96 milligrams a day just as a mathematical game. So I started taking the equivalent of 100 milligrams a day. And within 3 months, my cancer went away. I went from a 97% chance of being dead in 10 years to alive and well and cancer-free. 2015, I was declared cancer-free, the only cure of polycythemia vera, as far as we know, on the planet. So it was truly an outlier. And I began to give it to family and friends for their stage 4 cancers. These are people who were sent home with hospice, 2 to 4 months to live, 3 to 6 months to live. And I was the last resort. There's nothing else can be done. Well, maybe this guy, this witch doctor can help me. Begin to give it to them, and their cancers went away. Most of those from 2013 on are still alive. Wow. In Wheeling, for example, there was a oncologist there. She had 8 patients, all sent home with hospice, 2 to 4, 3 to 6 months to live, no more chemo, no more treatments. And those 8 were on Vasta. They were all people that I knew because I was from that area. And their cancers went away. She called me. She said, this is not normal. She said that the common element between all of them is they're taking this Vasta. So I explained it to her, and she is now on it. And her husband, who was later diagnosed with prostate cancer, he's on it and has stopped his prostate cancer. No side effects. But it took me about 8 years to figure out, from a biochemical point of view, why in the world was it working? Well, in 2018, there was a research paper published. It actually goes back to 2016 when the research was done by Dr. Allison at MD Anderson. He ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize on it. He figured out that cancer protrudes spikes. They're called PDL1s, programmed death ligand 1s. They're like spikes you see on the COVID pictures, but they're proteins that stick up. All of our cells have those. They all sort of stick up. So when a T cell comes down to see if this cell belongs in the cells of the human being, or is it bacteria, or is it virus, or is it cancerous? When the T cell comes down, it has a PD-1. If the PD-1 touches the PD-L1 of the cell, your immune system runs away. It won't kill that cell. Now, that's why our immune system doesn't wipe us out. The T cells and the beta cells are very violent, aggressive cells. They'll kill anything that it comes into contact with. So cancer produces a huge number of these PD-L1s. So again, when the T cell comes down, make contact, and our immune system runs away. It won't kill the cancer cell. What the Vasta does is it comes down and it sticks to the end of the tyrosine of the PD-L1 and blocks it. So now when the T cell comes down, the PD-L1 has this molecule hanging off of it. It can't make contact, electrical contact with it, and kills the cancer cell in 4 seconds. Wow. When people have autoimmune disorders, all this was found out because of Allison's work and the reactivity of the tyrosine amino acid. And now I knew exactly how the Vasta was killing the PD-L1 positive cancers. Then we began killing cancers, people who had a glioblastoma. Glioblastoma is a pretty serious brain cancer. It's not PDL, it's PD-L1 negative. And yet when we gave them Vasta, it stopped the glioblastoma in about 2 weeks. People were having surgeries, having parts of the brain removed, having radiation, chemo, and still dying 4 and 5 months later from glioblastoma. Mm-hmm. But when we gave them Vasta, the cancer progression stopped. And as most people know, cancer does not stop its progression. It will just keep going. So I went back in to try to figure out what was going on. And when I switched from taking the pure astaxanthin, I stopped eating the algae. And I thought I'd be clever. As a chemical engineer, I knew how to extract that astaxanthin from that algae cell, make it more pure. So I'm not eating large amounts of biomass. That was becoming a little bit of a problem. So I extracted it in what's called a CO2 supercritical extraction, and I can get the pure astaxanthin that you now see in Walmart and in stores around. You can buy astaxanthin. So I began taking that. Well, where I was taking 100 milligrams per day, when I switched from eating the equivalent in the algae to just the oil, the pure astaxanthin, my cancer returned. And I had to go well over 800 milligrams a day just to get my cancer turned back around again and get it stopped. That was a little eye-opener for me. So why, if I'm eating the algae biomass, did I only have to eat the equivalent of 100 milligrams a day? But if I did the purified astaxanthin, I'm at over 800 milligrams to get the same effect. So the only way that could be is if those two molecules were somewhat different. One was different in the biomass, then it was different after I extracted it. So what I did is I looked at the astaxanthin in the biomass, and it was in one of two forms or both forms, a glucosidic form or a liposomal form. The glucosidic form is a glucose molecule attached, chemically stuck to the astaxanthin. So it looks like a tadpole with a tail or a sperm cell. Liposomal means it's got a fatty acid attached to the astaxanthin. But when I would do the supercritical extraction, I cracked those off. The pure astaxanthin. And it's all about absorption. When the glucose is attached to the astaxanthin, every cell in your small body looks at that glucose and absorbs it very, very quickly. It likes the sugar. So the pulls, it's called a Trojan horse. And I did this in bioweapons development, we could attach sugar to a chemical compound and get it into the body over time. But I did the same thing here. So I attached a glucose to the astaxanthin, and that was a game changer. Now, these non-PD-L1 expressed cancers were still being killed by the Vasta because cancer loves sugar. So when the cancer sees that sugar molecule, it pulls it in.
Mm-hmm.
But it's chemically attached to the astaxanthin. So when it goes inside the cell, the cancer splits the sugar off and uses it for energy. Now the astaxanthin is inside the cell.
Wow.
Well, cancer cells produce hydroxyl free radicals. These are OHs, an oxygen and a hydrogen, with an unpaired orbital. It has an electron there that makes it very reactive. It causes over 92%. That one molecule of the hydroxyl free radical causes 92% of all inflammatory disease. That's what we found out later. So now I've got the hydroxyl free radical being generated by the mitochondria of the cancer cell, and it has a pH of about 5.8, which is acidic. Anything below 7 is acid, anything above 7 is alkaline. So it creates an acid environment around, with those free radicals, around the cancer cell, and it kills adjoining normal cells and makes space for the cancer cells to grow by just necrotically killing them because of the acid. Well, when the Vasta goes into the cell, the Vasta donates an electron to the hydroxyl free radical, which has a 0 charge. All that means it has the same number of protons as it has electrons, has a 0 charge, and has a pH of about 5.5. When it donates an electron to the OH 0 charge, it becomes an OH -1 valence. That OH -1 is the hydroxyl ion, shoots the pH up over 11, kills the membrane of the cancer cell in seconds. We've watched it underneath the microscope, and it is unbelievable how the cell membrane, the cancer cell membrane, just ruptures, just comes apart when the pH changes. That's why Warburg ended up, and he realized that alkalinity could keep cancer cells from forming. Well, you can't change the pH of your blood.
Mm-hmm.
You change the pH of your urine, but you can't change the pH of your blood. It's always 7.35. If it drops to 7.3, you're going to be very sick. If it goes to 7.4, you're going to be very sick. So what happens is you can't change the cellular pH unless it's done at the cellular level.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't drink alkaline water, for example, and change the pH of your cell because you can't get past the blood 7.35 pH. Now we have a bullet, a missile that can actually make penetration into the cancer cell, change the pH intracellular, and kill the cancer cell. That's why we've been so successful.
Wow. And this is patent, right? Correct?
It is. We have 2 patents on it. The first one was on the glucosidic and the liposomal form of the astaxanthin. That was patent number 1. The second patent was, I had worked on what's called the Lunar Outpost Commission. It was the Artemis project, 1991 to 1994. And we knew we couldn't go to Mars because the radiation exposure was too great. And the radiation would cause such an inflammatory disease response, no astronaut would make it in the 1-year trip. So we knew we had to shut it down. We knew we can't go to Mars. And I wrote a couple papers about it when Elon Musk got involved in SpaceX. And I said, there's no way you can go to Mars. The biology won't allow you to do it. But I said, I have a way to stop the radiation and the inflammatory response from the radiation with Vasta. So I filed a patent. And the way we found it was people who were getting radiation treatments for cancer that were also on Vasta got no burns, no radiation burns. Whereas people who were not taking Vasta, having the same dose rads of radiation, were getting severe burns on their backs, second-degree burns, just from the radiation exposure. But we got none if they were on Vasta.
Wow.
So we filed a patent on it, and that patent was granted in November of 2022 to stop the burns, the inflammation caused by radiation exposure. Then we get, it was a funny story, 4 elderly women from when they were 18 years old until they were 80. They were 80 now, and every year the 4 of them would go to Florida and have their little girls. They did it for 70 years, 60 years. So 2 of them were on Vasta and 2 of them were not. Well, the 2 that were on Vasta, they said it was the first time in that 60-year period they got no sunburns. So it acts as an internal sun tanning lotion, the same as it does for the algae.
I didn't know that one.
Yeah, it blocks the UV radiation. So when radiation comes down, hits the water in your cell, cracks it into the hydroxyl free radical, 2 of them. That's what causes the redness, the burning, the water accumulation, the blistering. Well, when it comes down and the radiation hits the water molecule, cracks it into the hydroxyl free radical. If there's astaxanthin there, it immediately neutralizes it and converts it back to H2O or water. No more burns. Yeah.
Wow.
So now you get a suntan with no sunburn, and you don't have to worry about the inflammatory issues. We have a blood test now called an HSCRP. Everybody should get that run.
Say that again.
HSCRP. It stands for high sensitivity C-reactive protein. Now, when you go into your doctor, you have to request that. And because he doesn't run it anymore, because they can't treat to your predisposition to get an inflammatory disease. That's not how medicine works today. They're not interested in a cure. They're interested in putting Band-Aids on symptoms. So if your CRP, your HSCRP is less than 3, then there's a 97% chance you will never get an inflammatory disease like cancer, heart disease, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, MS, irritable bowel, type 2 diabetes, Crohn's disease, Hashimoto's disease. You won't get any of those diseases if your inflammatory disease state is less than 3 on the HSCRP scale. If it's greater than 3, it's just a matter of time when you'll get arthritis, gout, type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's, tremors. So we have it down. I testified in Washington in May of 2019. There was a bunch of senators, representatives were there, 5 major hospitals, Johns Hopkins, Sloan, MD Anderson, Mayo, and Cleveland Clinic were all present at that meeting. About 200 people. It went on for about 2 hours. They were very skeptical. I actually had a director of oncology at one of the major hospitals come up to me and at the beginning, and he said, I really didn't want to come to this. He said, I've seen enough snake oil salesmen in my life.
Right.
Well, that's the reason I didn't go public with it, is that I'm at the age, I wasn't going to open it up for criticism at all. So I was just going to help family and friends. It wasn't a source of income for me. I wasn't dependent on it. I had started 8 other companies and started all 8 writing a business plan. This is the first one I've never written a business plan on, and it's got the highest impact worldwide of anything I've ever done in my life. But now we're in 37 countries,
wow,
all 50 states. It has just skyrocketed with only by testimonies and results. We don't do any sales, and it's only by word of mouth. And now we have doctors. When it started out 4 years ago, a little longer now, 5 years ago, every doctor considered it some sort of supplemental googly goo. Well, now we've reached a point where we have doctors taking it. They won't prescribe it to their patients.
Interesting.
And to me, that's an ethical problem. We also have several doctors now, including a world-renowned cardiologist in San Antonio, Dr. Stefan Kais. Kais is a world-renowned cardiologist. He invented what's called the Kais stent, saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives. And he takes it. He recommends it now to all of his cardiac patients. A year ago, this past February, my wife and I, he asked us if we'd come over, and he wanted to go in and look in our heart up into our brain and see how much arterial inflammation we had as 70-year-olds. And my wife's cholesterol runs about 260, unmedicated. She has no medicine at all for it. And mine's low. Mine runs about 160. But so we go over and he runs us through this cardiac test on a bicycle. I thought that was going to kill me. And then they did the sonic test in the heart, and scheduled for the 6:30 the next morning. He wanted to do me first and then do my wife after that. And I said, no. I said, well, you're going to do me first. If you kill me, my wife's at least going to have an option not to do it. So I went in and I watched the whole thing on the screen. This technology is remarkable. But he went in with a catheter, went into the aortic arch, went down my lads on my coronary artery, and I'm watching all this on this screen. Went up into the carotids. I don't know how far up in the brain he went, but come back out, and I'm in the recovery room, and he'd come in and he threw the sheet back. He said, well, you want the good news or the bad news? Because he told us if he found anything, he would fix it while he was in there. I said, well, give me the good news first. He said, the good news is you have no arterial inflammation. He said, you are off of the chart on a 70-year-old having no atherosclerosis. He said, wow. I can find no inflammation. Your coronary health is that of a 20-year-old. He said, I have no one on my distribution of disease. You're off on the bottom tail of that distribution. And I said, okay, what's the bad news? He said, well, the bad news is we found a congenital heart defect. And I said, what do you mean? He showed me, here I have what's called a severe systolic kink. From birth. I've had it. Every time my heart beats, my lad, which is the big widowmaker artery that goes around the heart, every heartbeat, it kinks just like that and cuts the blood supply off to my heart. So I have a heart attack every single beat of my heart. Wow. And I actually have the video of it. And I said, well, can you fix it? He said, oh, no. He said, we're not going to fix it. He said, you've lived with it now for 70 plus years. He said, we're not going to go in there and fix it. I said, well, how much longer do I have to live with something like that? He said, well, you're 70. He said, I'll give you another 30, 35 years. Okay, that's a deal. So then my wife went in, and he was sure he was going to find something with her because her cholesterol was so high. Found absolutely nothing.
Amazing.
He also has a coronary health of a 20-year-old. And that's when he put his entire staff on Vasta. And now his entire staff. They, by mandatory employment, they all have to be taking it. He's the #1 cardiologist in Poland. He's #4 here in the U.S. If anybody wants their heart fixed, he's the guy. He's in San Antonio. It's called the Heart Institute. Top-notch guy. But if I had known that it was going to this level, it might have swayed a lot of the decisions that I would have made in my life. But we've ended up here by just baby steps. and it's gone completely around the world. Um, Pretty interesting story.
It is. It's so fascinating. I forgot I was doing a podcast for a couple times in there. I was just it's so fascinating because I thought I did my research on it. Like because we were supposed to have this podcast before and we got a little sidetracked here and there with our schedules, but and I yeah, obviously did some research on you and I just found it fascinating then. Now it's like just the next level here of what I'm hearing and it's amazing. And wow. I mean, like the one thing that I didn't ask here, Sam, was like, how do people find out more about this? Because if you're not interested in this and you've been watching this, I don't know what you've been doing, but
Yeah, everyone, you can go to the website. All the testimonials are on there.
what's the website, Sam?
It's Valasta, VALASTA.net. And all of the NIH research. So when I gave the presentation in Washington, they allocated a huge amount of money into the NIH, I think to prove me wrong. They ended up confirming everything that I had found. So you don't have to believe anything I'm saying. You can now Google or search NIH and astaxanthin and whatever disease, cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, arthritis. And now they've completed since 2019 and some back in 2015, it sort of started also. All this research is now confirming exactly the same stuff that I found.
Mm,
We're off,
fantastic.
we're off to the races. There's no reason for people to get sick anymore. And diet's a big portion of it, as you're aware, making sure that you're keeping the inflammatory disease at bay. Diet is very crucial. One of the most inflammatory foods that we can ever eat is fructose. 67% of all diseases come from fructose. And table sugar is 50% fructose, 50% glucose. Every cell in your body can use glucose. There isn't a single cell in your body that can use fructose. So when we consume, and it happened in 1966, by the way, and I can go through the forensic work that I had done on what's in our food system that's killing us. Well, I found it, and it happened in 1966. So fructose, whether it's in fruit, whether it's in fruit juices, doesn't make any difference. I don't eat any fruit. I might maybe once or twice a year have a glass of orange juice, but that's about it. Our bodies were only intended to eat fruit 2 months out of the year when the fruit became ripe. Then we would spend the next 10 months healing from the inflammatory response. So the only reason we eat fruit is because it tastes good. It meets a human desire.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see people with scurvy anymore, or we get enough vitamin C in our vegetables that we don't have to worry about getting scurvy or dental problems or anything like that. So we eat fruits because it's sweet. All of our sweetness comes from fructose. And that's what's killing us. To satisfy an immediate human need or desire, we have a long-term problem with inflammation.
Yeah, and I believe that wholeheartedly, Sam. I know you don't know my story, but in 2014, I just hit the skids with, and they gave me all kind of diagnosis. I got MS, rheumatoid. I mean, I just went through it, and man, cut out sugar. It's amazing.
It is amazing.
It just changed the game, and I was in bad shape, like for a month. I mean, I was, fortunately. For me, I did a little bit of research and things like that. Had a pretty good doctor in Cleveland Clinic that I met that told me, like, on the outside and the inside, really nothing's going on other than these symptoms. You're fine. So I was like, okay, well, if I'm fine, like, what is going on? And then she told me, she's like, I could give you a lot of things. I could keep putting you on these pills for the pain and everything. And she's like, I would suggest you start eliminating things. And I
Yeah.
had started already. And she said, if you can, do sugar. And I was like, loud and clear, because I was miserable. It was, and I was very, I'm not really, I don't think I'm that old now, but I mean, that was 10 years ago. And I was just looking for a solution, and just to your point, you really have to cut that out. And I think our culture and our society is just so consumed with those things. And I think it's just going to get worse if we don't get more intelligent about what we're putting in our bodies.
We really are. And the whole premise, everybody thinks that their food's contaminated, and that, all of these environmental factors, it's all inflammation. For example, you hear a lot about Roundup causing cancer in the paraquat. Well, the paraquat itself doesn't cause cancer. The paraquat causes an immediate immune response. It creates inflammation. The inflammation is what gives you cancer. So in the pathway, the biological pathway to go from even genetics to cancer, there's like 27 different things that have to happen. Only about 10% is related to genetic predisposition. So just because and I've gotten into this discussion, I've presented on it. Some women, out of fear, are having their breasts removed because their mother had breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely the wrong thing to do. The genetic predisposition for her to get cancer is directly related to her inflammatory disease state. Fear is what gets people killed. Whenever you make a decision because you're afraid, it will always, always be the wrong decision. I wrote a book on this called Live Your Life Fearlessly, The Journey of a Stoic Christian. It's on Amazon. You can order it. But fear is what creates the problem. Now, it's hard to tell a woman who's had radical mastectomies that she didn't have to do that. And because to go from a genetic predisposition to breast cancer, like I said, there's 22 things that have to happen in between. It has to be perfectly aligned. It's not easy to get cancer, believe it or not. It's very difficult. But once it happens, the probability might be low, but the consequences are huge.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to look at stopping it within that biological pathway. And inflammation is the key. And that HSCRP measures your concentration of the 4 free radicals that I found: superoxide, singlet oxygen, the peroxyl, and the hydroxyl free radical. Those are the 4 that cause really 92% of all human death. Vasta neutralizes all 4 of those. That's why it works.
Wow, that's amazing. And thank you for sharing the science behind it too. I really appreciate that. Wow.
I'd like to take all the credit for it, but I taught biochemistry to pre-med doctors and nurses. It's actually in the textbook. These are not clinical studies that have to be done. This is textbook stuff. This is stuff that every doctor, by the way, is taught. It's all in these books. And yet, when they go to medical school, it's completely brainwashed out of them. And because if disease is ever eliminated, which is where we are now, we can now eliminate disease. These guys are going to become plumbers and welders. That's what's freaking everybody out right now. Is, oh my golly, if St. Jude's no longer has, if there's no more childhood cancers, if there's no more charities, cancer charities, heart charities, we're on the verge of all of those being dissipated. It's $1 trillion a year business that we can now eliminate. That's, I hope I live long enough to see it, but that's where we're headed now with the knowledge that we have.
Wow, just fascinating. So at the end of this, Sam, we always ask people, because of the podcast is called Your Best Day Yet. We always ask our guests, how would you define your best day yet?
My best day yet. That's I have a lot of good days now, but I went from knowing my life was over. You can call it being born again, you call it whatever you want, to all of a sudden, once the day the fear left me, I fear nothing anymore. I don't fear losing my children. I don't fear being beheaded. I don't fear being killed. There's no more fear in my life, because that took me to a single point, that day after, when all of that fear left me, opened my world up. I've actually probably got more patents since I was told I was going to die than I had before. So my best day ever, I have a lot of good days. I can't even lock it down to one. I've got to, I'm sorry, but that's
great.
reality.
No. That's good. Let's end on that, Sam. So again, Sam's website, valasta.net. It's fascinating. Been on there. So, I go on, do your own research, see what you have to say. Sam, thank you for doing what you're doing.
Eric, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being a champion. Thanks for radiating light and love into this world, brother. I appreciate it so much, and keep doing great work, man. This is fascinating. It really is.
It really is. And if you want to do another one on dinosaurs, or if you want to go dinosaur hunting, let me know.
All right. I certainly do. I just didn't want to take away from what we talked about, because I'm very interested. All right, folks. That's all for today. Thanks for watching and listening. Man, if you didn't, wow, listen to it again. It's definitely worth listening to again for sure. Sam, we'll have you back and talk dinosaurs on a later episode. Love to have that and do that. So if you want more information, folks, you can visit our website at centerforvictory.com. And just remember, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, make this your best day yet. We'll see you soon.